It Fights Back here. Since Slippery Jim's Gucci Hobo League came to an end, I decided to min-max my Ethereal Knives trap build to see if I could actually make it a viable build for late game content while still using the unique only requirement. I was never able to get off a 5 link in the actual league, so it felt pretty lackluster. While it is still quite a meme build, it turned out much better than I expected. I was finally able to reliably do red maps, including metamorphs. I did a red tier blight map. That was pretty easy given the layout only having 2 paths into the pump, though I would not recommend attempting a blight map with this build without towers. Some minion towers are useful to stall enemies, along with arc towers to lay down some damage when needed. Delving is extremely smooth, though darkness diving is scary due to the effective HP. For the in-node encounters, however, you can usually turn off your brain, stand still, and just spam traps. Not everything is super easy though, like this T14 breach that spawned a toll. I was able to tackle a Constrictor and a Chimera, and to my amazement, I was also able to take down Awakener 8 Sirus. That full fight will be at the end of this video. I ended up spending around 20x to gear the character to its current state. While I only marginally increased the survivability of the character, I gave it roughly 2.5 times the damage. It is possible that this build can be made much better with some actual gearing through rare gear, but I will leave that to someone else to do. So looking at the gear, the only piece that I did not replace from my SSF build is my weapon. I did not think any corruptions on a Heartbreaker would be better than the implicit critical strike chance that comes on the dagger. Every stat on the Heartbreaker is useful, mostly so the Culling Strike. For my offhand, I originally was using the Princess purely for the physical damage as extra cold that it provided. Moving over to a trade league, I was able to get my hands on a Culten Soul, which is a Prophecy Fated Unique upgrade from the Culten Halt Shield. What this adds is 20% of fire damage from hits taken as cold damage. It also gives a large amount of cold res, allowing me to drop my Dream Fragments for a second Ming's Heart, and 5% to max cold res. This synergizes really well with the Taste of Hate I am using, which gives 20% of physical damage taken as cold damage. Culten Soul also gives physical as extra cold, so it was not much damage loss from the Princess. I ended up buying every max roll 15% Fizz as extra cold Culten Halt I could get for under 4 chaos, along with the prophecies to upgrade them so that I could corrupt them trying to get physical taken as cold. But after 41 attempts, 12 bricks, 19 with no change, and 10 implicit corrupts, I settled on the physical taken as lightning. Next, let's look at the helmet. I purchased a gold rim that had the Ethereal Knives damage enchantment. A couple weeks ago, MBX Stream made a video turning in a bunch of divination cards that give unique helmets with Eternal Lab chance. Upon seeing him get this EK damage gold rim, it kickstarted my idea to fully min-max this build once I got to the trade league, so I purchased it from him for 3 exalts. The gold rim is by far the best way to cap resistances using only unique gear. I'm still surprised this helmet even existed in the first place. So now let's jump to the All's Uprising. This was the most expensive purchase I had to make, costing like 7 exalts. This amulet replaced my Karui ward that was being used for the dexterity as well as projectile damage and projectile speed. The Alls covers the dexterity while also letting me run Hatred with no mana. This is huge considering I'm using Mind Over Matter as a large portion of my survivability. This in itself is a huge damage increase as Hatred gives physical as extra cold damage. So on that note, I purchased 2 Ming's Hearts and a Sunblast belt, all with the increased Hatred effect corruption. These were around 25 to 40 chaos each. While slightly reducing max life and ES, the Ming's Hearts are a massive source of chaos resistance while giving 20% physical damage as extra chaos each. 20% Hatred effect is effectively 5% physical damage as extra cold damage on top. Big damage increase. The Sunblast belt is mandatory for making this build feel smooth to play. With this belt, enemies do not need to trigger the traps and they will detonate on their own at the end of their duration. It makes it feel like less of a trap build and more like a grenade style build. The original idea when making this build was to have all the traps detonate at the same time like a massive pipe bomb. While it looks extremely satisfying, it is not practical, so we use the Sunblast. My boots are Brine-Rot Whalers, which scale very well with EK, as they have increased physical damage and increased projectile damage. I got a pair of these with a max energy shield roll and ran them through Uberlab until I hit the increased critical strike chance if you have not crit recently enchant. This is huge for traps, since when they crit, it does not count as you critting, so this is effectively a permanent crit chance buff for the traps. I purchased a 6-link Restless Ward, which in itself was a huge damage upgrade as I needed a 6-link. I 5-linked a Restless Ward close to 15 times in SSF before I gave up. However, I was able to purchase a 6-link with +1 level of socketed gems for only 40 chaos, which shows how useful this chest is for normal builds. But for this build, it gives a massive amount of quality of life through the charge sustain while also having a decent amount of life and ES. So that gives me a level 22 Ethereal Knives on top of the 6-link. Lastly, I knew the last piece of gear I needed would be Hands of the High Templar, because this was my only source of capping my fire and lightning resistances with my glove slot. Since I was looking in the trade league, I wanted to try and get a pair with +1 frenzy charge and spell base crit. And this was the cheapest available option, costing me 4 exalts. So I'm getting +1 level to my hatred socketed into the gloves and +3 levels to my bear trap. Now for the gems. Adding in hatred, I had to remove charged traps from the bear trap setup, which was only being used for throwing speed. Bear trap is linked with advanced traps for throwing speed and increased duration. When an enemy is hit by bear trap, they take 15% increased damage from traps and mines, and extending the duration of that buff is very helpful for the effective damage of the EK traps. Levels on bear trap only increase the damage it does. They do not scale the buff duration or the damage increase from traps. So the level 23 bear trap is not particularly useful. One side note, the sound of bear trap going off on an enemy is one of the most satisfying sounds in the game, and immobilizing metamorphs with it is equally satisfying. In my boots, I have Whirling Blades with faster attacks and Fortify, as well as Enduring Cry. Whirling Blades is my primary movement ability, and due to the glass cannon nature of this character, Fortify is very useful. In my helmet, I have Flame Dash, Arcane Surge, and Faster Casting as a secondary movement skill. Keeping both Arcane Surge and Fortify up is the most difficult thing to do on this character, which also plays into the Restless Ward being so useful, as Enduring Cry only needs to be cast once every 20 seconds to keep up endurance charges. Also here, I have Summoned Skitterbots. That took the place of increased duration when I removed the gem from the unlinked socket in my 5-link Restless Ward. In my shield, I have Projectile Weakness linked to Faster Casting and Spell Totem. Faster Casting isn't extremely necessary, but it is nice for surprises in breaches, abysses, legions, blights, and delves. Self-casting the curse would further take away from the effective DPS of the EK traps. In my dagger, I have Vol Grace, Vol Clarity, and Vol Righteous Fire. These are only for intense situations like Metamorphs and Legion encounters. Last but not least, in my chest, I have EK linked with Trap, Cluster Trap, Charge Traps, Trap and Mine Damage, and Controlled Destruction. Ideally, I would have an Awakened Controlled Destruction, but I ran out of money for that. For my Ascendancy, I am a Saboteur. I got Born of the Shadows for the survivability from Blind, Pyromaniac for the Ignite and Shock immunity, life regen, and mana cost reduction. Perfect Crime increases damage for each trap placed, and chance for them to trigger an additional time. It is worth noting that traps are only triggered by enemies. Traps that detonate when they expire do not have a chance to detonate twice. So using the Sunblast to trigger your traps will not proc the additional detonation. Lastly, I have Explosive Expert, which allows Skitterbots to provide additional crit chance and LE penetration. Chain Reaction is not used because the reach of EK is scaled by projectile speed rather than AoE, and the ability for nearby traps to trigger when a trap triggers would better emulate the pipe bomb idea. However, it is not necessary as all traps will go off anyways because of the Sunblast belt. I am going to quickly go over the tree. If you want to look at it more in depth, pause the video here and here. I will go over the jewels. Also, the path of building Pacepaint is in the description. In short, I have trap nodes, not the cooldown ones, crit nodes, life nodes, efficient mana and resistance nodes, and projectile speed. The most important notables are these 3 trap and mine nodes, clever construction, devastating devices, and high explosives. Traps not being destroyed is very important. More important for an EK trap build is piercing shots. Being able to pierce enemies allows you to one-shot packs rather than chunk away at them. This jewel here is coated shrapnel. It gives flat physical damage to traps on all nodes in the radius. This jewel dropping is what caused me to consider EK traps in the first place. I bought a Corrupting Blood one for 1.6x because I could. 7% of my total damage comes from this jewel. I think a good rare crit multi-jewel would still be better, but this is the best use of this jewel I could possibly think of. Acro and phase acro is huge for don't get hit builds like this one, though I'm losing 30% energy shield, survivability increase is well worth it. The next jewel I have here is Ring of Blades, allowing EK projectiles to fire in a Nova. Without this jewel, this build would feel very bad to play. This jewel is absolutely mandatory. I originally tried to push over to Master Sapper in this part of the tree for the extra chance to generate frenzy charges. The charge trap support gem already gives 30% chance to generate frenzy charges, and sustaining charges is easy with the Restless Ward chest. Onto the witch part of the tree. I have this strength node here, which allows me to level Fortify and the bear trap increase duration quite a bit higher. I have Wicked Ward, which helps with energy shield sustain. It feels so weird to be using Wicked Ward and Acrobatics. Acro lowers max ES by 30%, but the gear I'm using gives a solid amount of ES, making it a valuable part of our defenses, so helping to keep that up is very helpful. Arcane Will is huge for mana sustain, as well as giving a nice chunk of ES from max mana. Prodigal Perfection with my mana pool gives 43% spell damage in addition to the mana it provides. In the jewel socket here, I have a cheap construction jewel, which in conjunction with the Sunblast belt lowers the trap duration to 10%. You can use 2 of these jewels for minimum trap duration, and it will not prohibit your ability to gain frenzy or power charges, but using 2 doesn't seem necessary for the playstyle to feel good. Deep Thoughts is the next most efficient 2-point mana node I can get. Jewel Prep gives much needed life and all res. I then take the crit nodes to push down over to Mind Over Matter. My Anointment, Holy Dominion, gives biz damage and the last bit of resists I need. Lastly, I drop this power charge here to get another jewel socket where I put a Watcher's Eye, giving base critical strike chance while affected by hatred. The gear swap also left me with only 75 cold res with a cap of 80. I was able to drop 30 dex node over here because of the All's Uprising and this small all res node here. I picked up Frostwalker to cap out my resists. That leaves me barely capped on resists with decent chaos resistance. I forgot my flasks. I have a Divine Life Flask with bleed removal, a Quartz Flask for the extra dodge chance, phasing, and curse immunity, the Taste of Hate for the physical damage as extra cold and physical damage taken as cold, a Diamond Flask with freeze immunity, and an Enduring Mana Flask with movement speed. Before the gear swap, I was relying on an Enduring Mana Flask with all res to cap my resistances, which was a nightmare. For my Pantheon, I have Soul of Lunaris and Aberrath. I couldn't be bothered to fill those the rest of the way out. I got what I needed. I always recommend Aberrath for the unaffected by burning ground so you do not die to blight monsters. Being ignite immune with the Saboteur Ascendancy does not make you immune to burning ground. That wraps up the build guide. I have 2800 life, 1000 unreserved mana for Mind Over Matter, and 860 ES, giving me around 4700 effective HP at level 94. Here's an Awakener 8 Sirus fight. Leave any questions in the comments below. Thanks for watching.
Need a map? Did you really think this would work?
Sirus, please, we want to help you. Don't do anything hasty.
Destroying you is as easy as flicking a pest.
No!
Zana!
Kirak!
How boring and small.
You want the Atlas? Take it. It's yours. But Oriath, I will burn to the ground.
Perhaps the suffering of my fellow citizens will finally stir something.
Glorious flames!
What's this? A real challenge? You've finally caught my attention.
Die.
What's the point? Obliteration! Creation itself! Why resist?
The others found strength in their projections. They became reliant